This video is all about analyzing the story structure of Made in Abyss and guessing what the future might hold, so there's going to be a lot of heavy manga spoilers, so be warned. Also, another thing to note, this video is less of a scripted, structured video essay style thing, and more of just me rambling about these topics. There is a structure to the video, and I will have stuff to accompany it, but it's not going to be very formal, so just keep that in mind. Made in Abyss is a very video game inspired story, and for how unpredictable a lot of the actual events and subjects of the story are, the overall structure is very consistent. There's a very stable pattern to it. Uh, this is very apparent with the abyss itself being chopped up into neat little sections, leading to a constant start-stop as the group descends and goes forth. But the arcs themselves seem to be in a repeating ABC kind of cycle. The A arc introduces us to the new cycle, and it increases the threat level, the mystery, and generally how strange everything is. And these arcs mostly focus on a core theme of this series. This guides the story moving forward, and it also recontextualizes a lot of stuff from previous arcs as well. And they also elaborate on the previous cycle's B arc, which I'll get to in a second. The B arcs focus on one of the white whistles, and one of the levels of value as well, which then carries on into the start of the next cycle. And this also continues and expands upon the theme established in the previous A arc, so it's kind of like every arc it switches out one of the value levels and one of the themes. The C isn't necessarily an arc, it's usually only a few pages, but it's just the gateway to the next cycle. And in order to bypass this gateway, it's like a video gamey lock and key system. Rico needs to go through the events of the B arc and learn that level of value in order to bypass the C gateway. Before I get into laying out the cycles themselves and what's in them, it's very important to understand what the actual 5 levels of value are, since it's really roughly gone over in one chapter in the actual manga. I'm just going to be giving a basic explanation of them, but there's a really good video which I will leave down below, which actually goes over the levels in the context of the Ilblue arc, and is kind of what got me to understand the levels a bit better. The 5 levels are Shi, Ku, Gutsu, Mei, and Haku. Shi, it's the most basic one. It's the starting level of value. I like to imagine it as the formation of a snowball that is then sent rolling down a hill, so it's the start of someone's wish. Ku is accumulation of value. It's as the snowball rolls down the hill, it builds up more snow and combines with the smaller snowballs that it crosses paths with. Essentially, the goals of others end up being what pushes someone forward. That is essentially Ku. Gutsu is the solidification of value. It is when the snowball finally reaches that final destination, and this is when someone's perceived wish comes to pass. And for these first 3 levels, it's very much like inner need versus outer want type of situation, where the first 3 levels are about the formation and seeing through of your outer need. And then starting with Mei, this is when new stuff comes up, and it's like a reaction to Gutsu of facing the reality of your perceived wish, and with new information and new stuff coming up, this is when you start to like rethink what your wish actually is. And then that reveals Haku, which is the highest form of value, essentially your inner need. And another thing to note, separate from the value stuff, is that both the Abyss and the White Whistles follow the order of mystery. That's usually what I just call it, where what is the most well known comes first, and then it slowly descends from there. The layers are pretty straightforward because it's all laid out from the start, but the White Whistles seem to be in more of like a, we get information on one of them, and that is the next White Whistle. Like Habo tells us about Ozin, and we hear stuff from Leader about Rico's origin, and then Ozin's the next one. And then when we get to Ozin, we hear that, oh, this Bondru dude, pretty bad. And then with the Nanachi's arc, we hear more about Bondru, and then he's the next, and so on and so forth. And that those two things kind of inform a lot of my speculation about future content. Now, for the actual cycles themselves, so starting with cycle 1, this is like the start of the story through the third layer. Areas here are very like heavily explored. Pretty much all of the information is known about them, and is like most of it's given up front, like before we even see like the first layer and Orth, we kind of switch between a lot. So we generally know most about the first layer, and we hear stuff like the inverted forest before we even go down into the abyss. The locations are also like pretty normal. They're very natural in appearance, and generally only have like a couple unusual features. Like the first layer has these fancy ruins and stuff like that, and then the second layer has like the inverted forest and stuff like that. Pretty straightforward, very, I don't want to say natural, but they're the layers themselves are pretty natural, and there isn't much crazy going on with them. And the curses are pretty similar. You can easily understand the curses and their effects just from the basic description. And they're things that most people have experienced, or at the very least could imagine what the experience could be like. The threat level is also very low. There aren't really any issues that can't be solved relatively quickly, and nothing major happens to the group here. There aren't any like lasting injuries. The A of this cycle, I combine both Orth and Layer 1 since it moves back and forth between them. It's pretty much the same spot narratively, and there isn't anything special that happens in Layer 1 once the journey actually starts from a thematic perspective. The theme, similarly, because it's the start of the story, it's pretty basic. It's just that curiosity and that spirit of adventure that lingers throughout the entire story. Everything in Orth encourages the children and everyone else to be curious about the abyss, and it encourages us, the viewers, to be curious about the abyss as well. And it lays the groundwork for a lot of the draws of the abyss, setting up a lot of the mysteries down there. B focuses on Ozin and the level She. Like I said before, in order to move past the White Whistle and get through the C gate, Rico must learn the corresponding level of value and how that applies to her and how those teachings affect her and the party. Up to this point, Rico's goals were very all over the place, not at all grounded, not very focused. They were all very loose goals, essentially just excuses to explore the abyss. Ozen forces Riko to rethink a lot of these drives. She gets a stronger connection to Reg. She gets a stronger drive to actually see her mother, and they become more of like actual goals that she wants to see out rather than just, hey, this is a vague reason to go into the hell pit. So it also seems like the white whistles themselves represent their value levels to some extent. Being the most like basic form of a wish of desires of value, Ozen is very stagnant compared to a lot of other white whistles, because all of the other whistles either had a strong enough drive to go on their last dive, or there's Bondrewd, who has a strong drive for science, that scientific triumph. She kind of just flickers from goal to goal and doesn't really have any greater aspirations and just tends to exist in the seeker camp and not do a whole lot, and is generally pretty depressed as a result. But yeah, she definitely embodies that like beginning formation period for those desires. The theme of curiosity and that adventurer's spirit are still very present there. They're not as upfront as in Orth, but a lot of new mysteries come up after like the end of Ozen's training, and we get a lot of tidbits about like lower down levels and more of it, like an added mystery to Liza's whole situation with there possibly being someone down there with her. And that definitely draws the audience in deeper into that mystery. The sea gateway here is the Great Fault. There's somewhat of an actual arc in the anime, but it's pretty much just reiterating a lot of those themes of She that are present in the Ozen arc. The main purpose of the Great Fault itself is just to be a 4 kilometer tall cliff face that adds a lot of like physical distance between the second cycle and cycle 1 in the surface, essentially just making that it makes cycle 2 feel very far away from any form of safety, and just adds to that like impact and that pressure. In order to bypass this, of course, Reg and Riko need to be able to cooperate with each other and rely on each other in a way that they couldn't before Ozen's training, and that like drive and groundedness is really like the true start of the journey, kind of, and that She value. Now for cycle 2, this is when it starts to fit more into like just 2 layers. Layer 4 and 5 are the main things in this cycle. The layers are a bit more mysterious, not as much is known about them, and they tend to be a bit more abstract, but are still very natural. And generally you can get the gist of what is going on in the layers by just looking at the map. Even if you don't know specifics of how a lot of the things work, you can generally tell what they're supposed to be. The curses here are things that people would understand by reading the description, but most people won't have like experienced these and won't know how they feel. So they're a bit more supernatural feeling, especially because they are a lot more likely to cause like serious bodily harm, although generally they're still pretty treatable. The threat level here is a lot more severe, with characters receiving actual permanent injuries in these layers, although typically only one person is in danger at a time, and most of the layers are still most of these 2 layers are still relatively safe as long as you're cautious and competent. Although a mix of bad luck and going straight into Edo front definitely caused the group to be in a bit more danger than they normally would be. So for A, obviously this is Nanachi's arc, and the main theme of this is love and sacrifice. Nanachi and Midi both became Narahate due to that shared love and through Midi's sacrifice. And in the end, that second sacrifice of Midi is what allowed Riko to be brought back from her coma and allowed Nanachi to be free of their burden, letting the group move forward and letting Nanachi move forward in their life. She is still present here through Nanachi being solely focused on her goal of sending Midi off and having just stagnated from that. And also, this is like the start of Nanachi's like character arc for the most part. So this is like that sense of like beginnings. B for Bondrewd, and also the level of Ku. Throughout this arc, the characters deal with a lot of like accumulated wills at some point or another. Like Reg, when he powers up, he gets that like flash of someone else inside of him, and that is what brings out that true power in the end that lets him fight Bondrewd. Nanachi, having inherited both Midi's will and also Reg and Riko's wills, that's shown in Nanachi like going out to offer themselves up to work for Bondrewd. And obviously, in the end, Riko inherits the will of Prushka to forgive Bondrewd, and also in the physical form of her white whistle. And the group as a whole inherits Bondrewd's will as he ends up supporting them and continuing their journey, which is also why Bondrewd and Wazakian, I feel personally that their death scenes are pretty similar, and that's because of the shared focus on the level of Ku. With Wazakian being a lot more upfront, directly talking about that accumulation, but Bondrewd's is still like that to a lesser extent. Bondrewd also like physically embodies the level of Ku, being both a scientist, which is a field built entirely off of the progress of others, but also he is physically made up of several different black whistles and mercenaries that came to him and added their bodies and their souls and wills to aiding him in moving forward and seeking out the dawn. Also, he is heavily focused on finding a way around that 2,000-year cycle, which the 2,000-year cycle seems to be due to the abyss overflowing with souls and accumulating souls. So it's essentially him fighting against the abyss's own Ku. Love and sacrifice continues to be a very strong theme in this arc, with both love and sacrifice being very prevalent in like throughout all of Prushka's arc, and a lot of what is talked about with between Bondrewd and the cast. The gateway here, pretty obviously, this is the most blatant gateway so far of the altar of the absolute boundary, a very literal, like, lock and key type situation. Not much explanation needed. Obviously, Prushka was required in order to move past. Cycle 3 is layers 6 and 7. We don't really know enough to know what the gate is, so that is up for interpretation as of yet. Both of the layers are very abstract and barely natural. There's some natural elements here and there, but they're a lot more out there and fantastical than the previous ones. They're recorded on the map, but it's hard to tell what to expect from just the illustration. And also, there's practically no information about them besides their name and a few pieces of a few pieces of minor information that Liza gave in her notes, like a couple creatures here and there. Although I think the only things that we know from Layer 7 are that reg species person, the clawbot that we see in Liza's notes, as well as apparently that blue and green bird from episode 2 that was like fighting with the hammerbeaks, is in the art book. It says that that is from the 7th layer, and its feeding habits are like shooting up and down between the main shaft, but we'll see if it comes back at all in layer 7. The curses here are also like very abstract. Just the basic definition doesn't really tell us much other than they're not very good. Like, loss of humanity and death is like the most vague possible description of what the 6th layer's curse does, and I'm assuming from the one picture that we've seen of the layer 7 curse that it's going to be similarly complicated and not as simple as just you're dead. They also have a lot of intricacies to them and a lot of like weird minor rules and stuff like that, like with the blessing. The threat level is a lot higher. Like the overall, like the entire layer itself is generally just a big hazard. There isn't really a way to feasibly like live here unless you have an extreme circumstance like with Ilblue. And most of the wildlife here, like the stronger wildlife, can go toe to toe with like the more combat oriented party members even at their full power. Even with like Faputa's healing ability and immortality and Reg's like strong armor, like still they are at a risk of severe injury. No major injuries have happened in layer 6 besides the turbident dragon scratching Reg's armor, but I feel like if any injuries were to happen, it probably wouldn't be survivable, save for like maybe Fopta. Who knows what the 7th layer will bring. The A arc for this cycle, obviously it's Ilblue. The theme is very obvious. It's definitely the most upfront of the themes so far, being values and its levels, which we've already covered, so there's that much to say. But if you want to know how the levels actually apply to the story of Ilblue and how the characters are affected by that, I would definitely recommend checking out that video that I put down below from Inspirational. Sorry if I butchered that. Ku is also very prominent in this arc, with Faputa being... her whole journey is caused by the accumulated wills of the Ganja Corps, and she is birthed, and her journey is like fulfilled because of that accumulation. And Wazakian's deathbed speech is very upfront about that accumulation and how it's affected the party thus far. Now we're getting into the B arc of layer 7. From here on out is all very speculative. All we know about layer 7, besides the couple creatures that I mentioned, is that it involves the pivotal ring and someone related to Reg, possibly that person that we saw in Reg's vision. I'm assuming Wakuna will also be there. Not really a hot take that I think most people assume that Wakuna is next. And if the idea of cycles is correct and continues throughout the story, then there will be a white whistle. And with Wakuna being the one that we know the most about, not that we know much, but we at least know he is an old man and he has some ability to go through the 5th layer without using the altar of the absolute boundary. So we have more of an idea of what he is about than we know about Srajo. If Gutsu is the major theme here, the group will have to confront some level of actualization of their wishes. The most obvious example of this is solving the mystery behind Reg, since that has been a major outward want for the group, especially for Reg and Rico. I think similar to how this happened at Ilblue, I think that's not going to be the only thing that happens. There's probably going to be a lot of other Gutsu happening with the other party members and with some of the side characters as well. So I assume the gatekeepers are going to be here too. With the Order of Mystery, Cycle 4, if it exists at all, would be the area where we know absolutely nothing about it. And being as we know of the gatekeepers and that they are on the way to the bottom, I am assuming they would be involved in Layer 7. Now, I feel like they will also be like a third group in the story since like each of the arcs like build upon the additions of the last, like with Layer 4 being like adding like these moral conundrums and a random child getting mutilated for an emotional high note. And like Layer 5 adding like combat and stuff like that. I think with Layer 6 adding a lot more like intricacy with like characters and stuff like that, and having multiple groups working on their own agendas. I wouldn't be surprised if that continues down to Layer 7. And for Wakuna himself, I assume that he'll be in some way a physical embodiment of Gutsu, because not only was Bondrewd a physical embodiment of his level of Ku, but Nanachi and Fopta are also physical embodiments of their main themes, with the Nanachi being created literally from love and sacrifice, and Faputa being a physical embodiment of value itself. I assume Wakuna will be similar, but I'm not sure in what way that will actually take form. I think he will probably be more kind-hearted, or at least kind-hearted for a white whistle, at least generally better than Bondrewd, because I feel like because we know a decent amount about him, or at least the other white whistles know a decent amount about him, if he were as bad or even equal to Bondrewd in Bondrewd's Bondrewdness, I feel like Ozen would have mentioned something, and Srajo gets a free pass because they're mysterious, and I wouldn't be surprised if Ozen doesn't really know about their motives too much. Since the White Whistles act as kind of like a surrogate family for Rico, I think Wakuna will act as like a grandfather figure. Very obvious with like the, oh, he's an old man thing. Who knows if this is going to be accurate, but if that is the case, he'll definitely be giving wisdom and guidance. Wow, he's the Lord of Guidance. Guidance in some way to the group. In terms of personality, we only really have two things to go off of to predict his personality, which is that A, all of the White Whistles are in some way, shape, or form not human. They have some level of inhumanness to their character and their motivations. And also, starting with Ozen, every character has had some like major unexpected trait. Tsukushi has talked plenty of times about the book that he got that inspiration from. I am not sure how this is going to manifest, especially seeing as we don't really know that much about him, but he definitely won't be a... Like, Tsukushi is definitely strayed away from making very basic, generic, boring kind of characters. He's definitely going to be a personality, that's for sure. Besides that, anything I could say about the seventh layer would just be crackpot theories. We don't really have that much information, but if any of you have any ideas about what the seventh layer could hold, I would love to hear that. I am always looking for new perspectives onto the future of this series. Now, for the fourth cycle, this would be like a hypothetical 8th and 9th layer, most likely. This would be significantly more abstract and probably completely devoid of any nature, unlike with cycle 3, where we kind of see some natural elements here and there. And following the Order of Mystery, nothing is known about this area. We don't even know if it even exists. And because I don't live inside of Tsukushi's head, I can't say anything about what the possible theme of A could be. But if anyone has noticed any themes besides that adventurous spirit, love and sacrifice and value that have been like trickled throughout the series, I would definitely love to hear about that. I have not heard any theories about other themes, so there is always open space for that. B, though, would definitely be Strajo and the idea of May. This would force the party to gain a new perspective on themselves and their beliefs and goals, and on the journey as a whole. May brings a lot of chaos. It is chaos, purity, and impurity are the definitions of it. And I imagine this arc will definitely be very chaotic in nature, probably very all over the place compared to the other ones. But I don't really have any further speculation on this besides the similar common structures that I talked about when I was talking about Wakuna. And I think with Strajo being the Lord of Mystery and the Obscure, I think that like chaoticness of May would definitely fit, as that mystery and like questioning yourself feels very intertwined. For Cycle 5, I doubt there would be another 2 layers, but instead I think Cycle 5 will just be the bottom of the abyss. And this would obviously involve Liza and possibly whatever is down there with her. And this would focus on Haku, and the connection between Rico and Liza would definitely be very front and center. I'm not sure how Liza would embody Haku besides just being the main driving force for the journey. But I feel like, especially in Cycle 4, and possibly even as soon as like Layer 7, we might learn more about Liza, and possibly like the Abyss has effects on people over time. And I feel like Liza, even though Liza was definitely not a perfect person before going down, she probably won't be the same person that we knew. And I feel like that leaves some open room for how she could possibly embody this Haku in a different way. With Made in Abyss being nowhere near completion, this theory is very work in progress. As new chapters and information and theories come out, I will be continually adding to this, and possibly further down the line, I might be able to give more of an idea of what the actual future might hold. Now, if any of you have any speculation, I would absolutely love to hear about it. I am always looking for new stuff, and I wish you all a fantastic day.